My brother got away with everything, so I let him fall into the trap he set for me. A 24-year-old man, and for as long as I can remember, my family life has been complicated. I grew up in a middle-class household with my parents and my younger brother, Leo, who's 22 now. If you've ever heard the term golden child, you already know where this is going. Leo was always the favorite, and no one even tried to hide it. Growing up, I had to follow a long list of rules. No skipping curfews, no bad grades, no talking back. And if I messed up, there were always consequences. But Leo, he was untouchable. He'd stay out past midnight, shrugging off the rules. And if he got caught, he'd just flash his innocent smile. And my parents would let it slide. He wrecked our dad's car once when he was 17, and instead of grounding him, they ended up buying him a new one. Meanwhile, I was still saving up for a second-hand bike. In college, Leo's behavior escalated. He cheated on assignments, which I found out when one of his professors emailed me by mistake thinking I was him. He had used my name to smooth over one of his plagiarism scandals. When his grades tanked one semester, he convinced our parents it was because of mental stress. They not only paid for him to retake all his classes, but also booked him a 2-week vacation to recover. I, on the other hand, worked 2 jobs to cover my own tuition. It didn't stop there. Leo had a knack for stirring up drama with his friends and then calling me to fix things. I'd find myself making apologies on his behalf, smoothing things over with people he'd hurt. By the time I realized how often this was happening, it had already become a pattern. Leo caused chaos and I was the one cleaning it up. The breaking point came recently when Leo got hired at the same company I work for. My parents had pulled some strings with a family friend to get him the job even though he had no relevant experience. I wasn't thrilled about it, but I figured I'd keep my head down and focus on my own work. That plan didn't last long. From the moment Leo started, he acted like he owned the place. He dropped our family connection to everyone who would listen and made sure they all knew we were brothers. At first, it was just little things like expecting me to show him how to do everything even though we weren't on the same team, but it escalated fast. Leo started giving me orders, telling people I was slacking off, and hinting that he could report me for not being a team player. He even started taking credit for my work in meetings. Then came the big blow. I was up for a promotion, a huge step in my career, and Leo managed to derail it. He made a massive mistake on one of his assignments and pinned it on me. When our boss called us in to discuss it, Leo had all these crocodile tears, claiming he was overwhelmed and that I had promised to help him but didn't. I tried to explain my side, but my boss didn't seem convinced. The promotion went to someone else, and Leo walked away without a scratch. When I brought this up with my parents hoping for at least a little understanding, they immediately took Leo's side. They told me I should be supporting my brother instead of tearing him down. But according to them, I was jealous of his success and they couldn't believe I'd stooped so low. That was the moment I realized I couldn't keep playing this game. I started paying closer attention to what Leo was doing at work. I noticed he was falsifying reports to make himself look better and blaming others when things went wrong. He wasn't just sabotaging me. He was messing with other coworkers too. That's when I decided enough was enough. I started documenting everything. Emails, timestamps, witness statements. I even confided in a trusted coworker. Someone I knew would back me up if things got messy. Leo didn't make it hard to gather evidence. He was so arrogant that he bragged about his manipulations in the break room. He thought he was untouchable. Leo's arrogance reached new heights during a team meeting. In front of everyone, he criticized me for a project delay. Something that was entirely his fault. He laughed it off like it was a joke, but I could see the smirks from some of my coworkers. He thought he had me cornered. The last straw came when Leo accidentally left my name on a fraudulent report, framing me for his mistakes. It was the perfect setup, but what he didn't know was that I had already been documenting his every move. I had all the proof I needed. That night, I stayed late at the office going over my evidence and making sure everything was in order. The next morning, I submitted a detailed report to HR. I didn't know what would happen next, but one thing was clear. I wasn't going to be Leo's scapegoat anymore. Update 1. After submitting the report to HR, I wasn't sure what to expect. The documentation included emails, timestamps, screenshots of his tampering with documents, and even statements from coworkers who had witnessed his manipulative behavior. I knew it was solid, but I didn't know how seriously HR would take it. A day later, I received an email confirming they had opened an investigation and would handle everything discreetly. They assured me my identity would remain confidential during the process. Leo, meanwhile, had no clue anything was happening behind the scenes. He carried on as if he were untouchable, laughing and bragging in the break room about how easy it was to stay ahead in the company. He even joked about how his connections meant he didn't have to worry about being held accountable. Coworkers who had once seemed indifferent to his antics were now avoiding him altogether. He didn't notice. His overconfidence was helping HR more than anything. He was making their job easy by leaving a trail of evidence wherever he went. HR worked quickly. They coordinated with IT to set up a digital audit trail. Something I had suggested when I submitted the initial report. It didn't take long for them to find what they were looking for. Leo was caught red-handed falsifying another report. He had edited the numbers to make himself look better while shifting blame for the mistakes to a junior team member. The audit showed everything. The timestamps, his login credentials, and the specific changes he made. HR now had undeniable proof. The next day, Leo was called into a meeting with HR. He started into the conference room as if it were just another routine check-in. I later heard from a coworker who saw him on the way and that he was smiling confident as ever. And that confidence didn't last long. HR had prepared everything. From the audit logs to witness statements. They laid it all out for him. Leo's smug demeanor disappeared as he realized the extent of the evidence against him. When confronted, Leo tried to shift the blame. He claimed he had been pressured into falsifying the reports, hinting that I was the one who pushed him to do it. He even threw in a few crocodile tears for good measure. But HR wasn't buying it. They had already spoken to me and several other employees, all of whom corroborated the real story. The audit logs didn't lie either. There was no way out for Leo. HR placed Leo on immediate suspension pending further investigation. The news spread quickly around the office. People who had once been wary of getting involved started to open up about their experiences with Leo. They shared stories of his lies, manipulation, and attempts to sabotage others. For the first time since Leo started working there, I felt like the tide was turning. When my parents heard about Leo's suspension, their reaction was exactly what I expected. They were furious. Not at Leo, but at me. In their eyes, I should have protected him. Even if he was in the wrong. They called me selfish and accused me of ruining his career. My mom even went as far as to say that I was letting jealousy cloud my judgment. I didn't bother arguing. I'd spent years trying to reason with them, and it never worked. This time, I let their words roll off my back. Leo called me that evening. His voice was full of desperation. He accused me of betraying him and begged me to talk to HR on his behalf. He wanted me to tell them it was all a misunderstanding or that I had misunderstood his actions. I let him talk, listening to excuse after excuse. Then I reminded him of all the time he had sabotaged me, stolen my credit, and left me to clean up his messes. This time, I wasn't going to save him. I hung up before he could argue. The days following his suspension felt surreal. Co-workers who had kept their distance started to approach me. Some apologized for believing Leo's lies. Others shared their relief that someone had finally stood up to him. It felt like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I could focus on my work without constantly looking over my shoulder. A week later, HR called me for an update. They thanked me for my cooperation and confirmed that Leo's behavior would likely lead to his termination. They also assured me that the company would take steps to ensure this kind of situation didn't happen again. It was a bittersweet moment. I was relieved to know the truth was finally coming out, but I also knew this would permanently change my relationship with my family. I haven't spoken to Leo since that phone call, and my parents are still furious. They've made it clear they think I should have handled things differently, but I'm done trying to meet their impossible expectations. For the first time, I feel like I'm standing on solid ground even if it means standing alone. Update 2. It didn't take long after Leo's suspension for HR to conclude their investigation. A week later, an official announcement was made. Leo was terminated for misconduct. The email from HR didn't go into too much detail, but everyone knew what had happened. Word spread like wildfire throughout the company, and Leo's reputation was in shambles. People who used to tolerate him or avoid confrontation were now openly sharing their frustrations about his time at the company. Meanwhile, my parents were livid. They called me nonstop, demanding to know why I had ruined Leo's career. According to them, I should have worked things out privately or helped him fix the situation. My mom even accused me of being vindictive and claimed I was jealous of Leo's success. They completely ignored the fact that Leo had sabotaged me, stolen credit for my work, and manipulated his way into his position. To them, none of that mattered. I didn't argue with them. I was done trying to justify myself. Leo's termination created a domino effect in his life. He began applying for jobs almost immediately but hit roadblock after roadblock. His former coworkers weren't shy about giving honest references, and the nature of his firing wasn't exactly easy to explain away. Every lead he had fell through. Within a month, he was openly complaining about being blacklisted and blamed me for his inability to find work. That's when Leo started a new campaign of manipulation. He reached out to mutual friends and acquaintances, spinning a story about how I had plotted against him out of jealousy. He painted himself as the victim of my scheming, claiming that I had sabotaged his career because I couldn't handle his success. At first, a few people bought into his narrative. I even had one or two old friends reach out asking me to explain my side of the story. But once I laid out the facts including screenshots and emails, they quickly realized who was telling the truth. Leo's lies were unraveling faster than he could spin them. As Leo's social circle shrank, his desperation grew. One evening, he showed up unannounced at my apartment. I was shocked to see him standing there looking disheveled and on the verge of tears. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. He launched straight into a plea for financial help, claiming he was on the verge of being evicted. He tried to guilt me, bringing up our shared history and how family is supposed to help each other. I didn't let him guilt trip me. Instead, I confronted him about everything he had done, not just at work, but throughout our lives. I reminded him of all the times I had cleaned up his messes, taken the blame for his mistakes, and sacrificed my own opportunities to help him. I told him this was his chance to take responsibility for his actions and grow from the experience. He didn't like that answer. He stormed off, muttering something about me turning everyone against him. The fallout didn't end there. My parents called the next day, furious that I had refused to help Leo. They insisted it was my duty to support him financially until he could get back on his feet. When I refused, they gave me an ultimatum. Either help Leo or they would cut me off from the family. I told them I wouldn't jeopardize my own stability for someone who had spent years undermining me. True to their word, they stopped calling after that. With Leo gone, things at work took a turn for the better. My coworkers who had once kept their distance because of Leo's influence started warming up to me. A few even apologized for believing his lies. My reputation improved and I felt like I could finally focus on my career without the constant shadow of Leo's manipulation hanging over me. Leo, however, wasn't done trying to control the narrative. He turned to social media, posting vague but pointed comments about being betrayed by someone he thought he could trust. In some posts, he outright accused me of sabotaging his life and destroying his career, but his attempts to play the victim backfired. People who had worked with him started commenting on his posts, calling him out for his behavior. The backlash was swift and Leo eventually deleted most of his posts. For the first time in years, I felt a sense of peace. Leo's influence was fading, and I was no longer the scapegoat in his life. People were seeing him for who he really was, and I didn't have to defend myself anymore. It was a moment of clarity. I realized I didn't need my parents' approval or Leo's validation to move forward. I was finally free from his shadow. Update 3. The fallout with Leo had barely settled when my parents decided to escalate things. One afternoon, they showed up at my workplace unannounced. I found out when my manager pulled me aside looking concerned. My parents were in the lobby demanding to speak with me. They were loud enough that several coworkers noticed, and it was clear they weren't leaving without a scene. Security and HR got involved quickly. They approached my parents and politely but firmly asked them to leave, explaining that personal matters shouldn't be brought into the workplace. My parents tried to argue, claiming it was urgent family business, but the security team didn't budge. They were escorted out, though not before leaving behind some pointed comments about how disrespectful I was being. Afterward, HR called me in to ensure I was okay and to remind me that further disruptions wouldn't be tolerated. It was humiliating, but it also made me more determined to set boundaries. That evening, I called my parents and made it clear they were never to show up at my workplace again. I told them if they continued to interfere, I'd have no choice but to cut contact. They didn't take it well, accusing me of being ungrateful and turning my back on family. Still, I stood firm. Meanwhile, Leo wasn't done scheming. He began reaching out to former coworkers claiming to have information about me. He painted himself as the victim, saying I had set him up at work and ruined his career out of jealousy. But his attempts to sabotage me fell flat. My coworkers informed me of his messages and dismissed them as desperate lies. Several even joked about how ridiculous his claims were. Leo's reputation was so damaged by that point that no one took him seriously. A few weeks later, my parents arranged a family dinner. They didn't tell me Leo would be there. I arrived expecting a quiet meal, only to find Leo sitting at the table looking smug. It was clear they had planned this as some kind of intervention. My parents started in right away, saying Leo deserved an apology and that I needed to fix the family dynamic. Leo chimed in, accusing me of ruining his future and turning everyone against him. I stayed calm and brought up the facts. I listed every instance where Leo had sabotaged me at work and showed my parents some of the evidence I had shared with HR. They dismissed it as irrelevant, saying it didn't matter because family should forgive and forget. I told them I wasn't interested in enabling Leo anymore. When it became clear they weren't willing to listen, I got up and left. I told them I wouldn't tolerate being guilted into cleaning up Leo's messes anymore. After that dinner, my parents gave me an ultimatum. Apologize to Leo and offer financial support or be disowned. I didn't hesitate. I told them if being part of the family meant enabling Leo's behavior, I was better off without them. True to their word, they stopped contacting me. I blocked them and Leo on all platforms, creating some much-needed space to focus on myself. Surprisingly, several extended family members reached out to me after hearing about the situation. They expressed support, saying they had seen similar patterns with Leo over the years but didn't want to get involved. Their solidarity was unexpected but appreciated. It made me realize that not everyone in the family saw things the way my parents did. With my parents and Leo out of the picture, I felt a sense of relief I hadn't experienced in years. The weight of their expectations and constant drama was gone. For the first time, I could focus on my own life without being dragged into their chaos. I started putting more energy into my career, my friendships, and my personal goals. Looking back, I realized how much the family dynamic had held me back. Cutting ties wasn't easy, but it was necessary. I didn't need their approval to move forward. For the first time in a long time, I felt free. Update 4. It didn't take long for Leo to find a new way to seek attention. He started an online fundraiser, claiming he had been wrongfully terminated and needed financial help to rebuild his life. The description was full of exaggerations and outright lies, painting him as a victim of a vindictive coworker me who had conspired to destroy his career. He even threw in some melodramatic language about how he was on the brink of losing everything and how his mental health was at stake. At first, the fundraiser gained a little traction. A handful of people donated small amounts and Leo shared the link across his social media platforms begging for support, but it didn't take long for his former coworkers to catch wind of it. Several of them left comments exposing his lies, pointing out his history of misconduct, and explaining the real reason for his termination. One even linked to a public article about professional ethics indirectly calling Leo out. The backlash grew quickly. Donations dried up, and the comment section became a battleground of people calling him out versus a few defenders who didn't know the full story. The fundraiser ultimately failed. Leo only managed to raise a fraction of his goal, and most of the donations were paired with mocking comments. Some people donated a single dollar just to leave sarcastic remarks. Like, "Here's to a fresh start. Maybe try honesty this time." Leo deleted the fundraiser within a week, but not before screenshots of the comments circulated among mutual acquaintances. His reputation already in tatters took another hit. Leo didn't take the failure well. He went on a public rant across his social media platforms, calling out certain people clearly aimed at me for being heartless and blaming me for sabotaging his fundraiser. His posts were long and filled with self-pity, but they didn't garner much sympathy. Most people had already seen through his act, and his attempts to gain support only made him look more desperate. Meanwhile, my parents tried to turn this situation into another guilt trip. They reached out to extended family members telling them I was being cruel to Leo and refusing to help him during his time of need. This backfired spectacularly. Many of my relatives already knew the truth about Leo's behavior and sided with me. Some even called out my parents for enabling him for so long. It was a small but satisfying victory. Leo's situation continued to spiral. He fell behind on his rent and was eventually evicted from his apartment. With no other options, he moved back in with my parents. This created new problems for them as they were already struggling financially. Supporting Leo's lifestyle was expensive and they were reluctant to cut back on their own spending. The strain began to show. They started complaining to anyone who would listen about how ungrateful I was for abandoning the family during such a difficult time. While all this was happening, my career was thriving. With Leo gone, my workplace had become a much more supportive environment. My hard work was finally being recognized, and I received a promotion that I had been working toward for months. It felt good to know that I could succeed on my own merit without anyone trying to undermine me. Leo wasn't ready to give up though. He reached out to me claiming he had changed and wanted to make amends. He started off by sending long, apologetic messages saying he regretted how things had turned out and that he wanted to rebuild our relationship, but it didn't take long for his true intentions to come out. He asked for money, framing it as a small loan to help him get back on his feet. He even hinted that supporting him financially would be a good way to heal the family. I didn't fall for it. I calmly reiterated the boundaries I had set and told him I wasn't interested in revisiting the past. Leo's tone changed immediately. He accused me of being selfish and spiteful, claiming I was enjoying his suffering. It was a familiar pattern when manipulation didn't work. He resorted to blame. I ended the conversation and blocked him again. My parents didn't let it go. Of course, they resumed their campaign of guilt, warning me that I would regret abandoning family someday. They even tried to rally mutual acquaintances to pressure me. But by this point, most people were tired of their drama. Leo's behavior had alienated so many people that he was running out of allies. As for me, I used this newfound peace to focus on myself. I started traveling, exploring places I'd always wanted to visit but never had the freedom to before. I also began investing in my future, putting time and money into hobbies and skills that brought me joy. It was liberating to finally live without the constant weight of Leo and my parents pulling me down. Looking back, it's clear that Leo's downfall was entirely of his own making. His manipulations, lies, and refusal to take accountability had finally caught up with him. For years, I had been the one cleaning up his messes, but now he was facing the consequences on his own, and I was finally free to move forward. Update 5. My parents' decision to continue supporting Leo financially had consequences they couldn't ignore for long. With Leo back at home and refusing to take responsibility for himself, the strain on their finances grew worse. Bills piled up and their savings dwindled as they tried to maintain their lifestyle while covering Leo's expenses. It didn't help that Leo continued to demand more expensive groceries, outings, and even the occasional online shopping spree. Within months, their debt had spiraled out of control, forcing them to sell their home and downsize to a much smaller place. Despite their worsening situation, Leo's behavior didn't change. He attempted to secure a few new job opportunities but burned bridges at every turn. Whether it was refusing to take direction, showing up late, or blaming others for his mistakes, the pattern remained the same. His reputation in professional circles was so tarnished that word spread quickly, and no one was willing to give him a real chance. Instead of reflecting on his actions, Leo doubled down on his narrative of being a victim, blaming everyone but himself for his failures. Nearly a year passed without contact from my parents. Then out of the blue, they reached out. The message was unusually cordial, apologizing for the way they had treated me and asking if we could talk. I was skeptical, but agreed to hear them out. During the conversation, they admitted they had underestimated how much enabling Leo had cost them financially and emotionally. They hinted at their struggles, asking if I could help them out just this once. I calmly declined, explaining that I couldn't jeopardize my own future to fix problems they had created. Leo's reaction to my refusal wasn't surprising. He found out through my parents and unleashed another tirade on social media, accusing me of being vindictive and holding grudges. His posts were filled with the same tired narrative, but by now no one cared. Most of his followers were long gone, and the few who remained didn't engage. His attempts to stir up sympathy fell flat. Amid all this, my extended family continued to be a source of unexpected support. Relatives who had once stayed out of the drama reached out to check on me and express their understanding. Some even shared their own stories of dealing with family members like Leo, reinforcing my decision to set boundaries. These connections became a source of comfort and reminded me that not all family relationships had to be toxic. Leo's downward spiral reached a new low when he was caught in another workplace scandal. He had managed to land a short-term contract through a family friend but quickly ran into trouble. According to mutual acquaintances, he was caught falsifying data again, leading to his immediate dismissal. This time, the story spread beyond his professional circle, cementing his reputation as unreliable. Meanwhile, my parents began to reflect on their years of enabling Leo. Although they never fully admitted their mistakes, they stopped defending him as fiercely as before. They also started pulling back on their financial support, realizing they couldn't continue to sacrifice their own stability for him. It was a small step, but it showed they were finally beginning to question their role in the situation. While all of this was unfolding, I hit a major milestone in my own life. I had been saving for years, and with Leo and my parents out of the picture, I was able to focus on my goals. I finally purchased my first home. A modest but beautiful place that felt like the ultimate symbol of my independence. It was a moment of pride and relief knowing I had built this life on my own terms. Leo's social circle continued to dwindle. The more people saw through his manipulations, the lonelier he became. Even his staunchest defenders grew tired of his antics. He tried reaching out to old friends and coworkers, but most ignored his messages or politely declined to reconnect. It was clear he was running out of people to blame or manipulate. Eventually, my parents asked to meet again. This time framing it as a neutral conversation. They admitted they missed me and wanted to work on repairing our relationship. I agreed, but only under the condition that they acknowledge past wrongs and respect the boundaries I had set. The conversation was tense but productive. While some progress was made, I made it clear that Leo was not part of the equation. They reluctantly agreed. Though I maintained a cautious relationship with my parents, I kept my distance from Leo entirely. There was no part of me that felt obligated to let him back into my life. Instead, I focused on moving forward. At work, I used my experiences to mentor younger coworkers, sharing the importance of setting boundaries and standing up for oneself. Looking back, I realized Leo's downfall wasn't my doing. It was his refusal to change that brought him here. For years, I had been trapped in a cycle of enabling him and seeking my parents' approval. Breaking free wasn't easy, but it was necessary. For the first time in my life, I felt a deep sense of closure. I had finally escaped Leo's shadow and the toxic family dynamic that had once held me back. And I knew I was stronger for it.